The population peaked at about 1.84, 1.85 million in 1950. It began declining steadily after that, and it declined even further after the '67 riot, but the riot didn't cause it. It was just sort of an accelerant to what was already happening. But what it did do is it drained some of these neighborhoods of businesses, and without businesses, there's not much of an economy, and things began to really sort of more self-deteriorate at that point. The companies maintained a presence in Detroit, but they were no longer the thing for Detroit. And as that happened, a single industry economy, and when it begins to abandon where it is, Detroit just kind of stopped being the motor city.
You also had a rise in crime in Detroit in the 70s, and that was probably in large part to the economic challenges that a lot of people in the city faced. And so that really sets off a chain of events for city government to respond to, right? How do we bring in more revenue when people are leaving the city? Not just white flight, but certainly by the 1970s, black middle class flight. And so a city that at one time had 1.8 million people is now down to just over 1.5 million people by 1973, and then by 1980, only 1.1 million people. By the year 2000, there are far fewer than 1 million people that live in the city. And that again had a tremendous drain on the city's resources and the ability to provide basic public services.
We begin in Detroit, Michigan, at one time the fourth most populated city in the country and one of the wealthiest. Well, it's now becoming the largest city in American history to file for bankruptcy.
This has been absolutely devastating. This is a city that personifies urban blight.
When I got elected, we needed to put on 500 lights a week to get neighborhoods lit. We had to buy new ambulances, we had to buy new buses, we had to train bus drivers.
But ultimately, you need a quality of life that makes people have a reason to stay in Detroit or to come to Detroit.
How do we improve the city and not revisit the same failed policies?
2008 to 2013, we began a rail system, we did land use planning for the first time, we created a small business fund that began the engine of small business development, we began school reform efforts.
It was the demolition of the abandoned houses. We've been taking down 100 vacant houses a week, and when you take out the burned out houses, we had a lot of vacant houses that are beautiful brick houses people walked away from when they were underwater in their mortgage. We started auctioning them on our own website. Now we auction 4 houses every day, and we've now moved 4,000 families into houses that were vacant 4 years ago.
Detroit's problem is it's so huge, and there's just not that many people anymore. So what do you do with all these swaths of land where there's just, polka dots of houses, and just fields and forests? It's a real challenge.
In the past 8 years or so, gentrification has gone to the downtown area, and that marks a radical change for Detroit. It's a welcome change. It's a limited change, given the scope of the problem. It's 140 square miles of a city, and this is, a handful of square miles of the downtown area.
There's a huge divide between the neighborhoods and downtown Detroit. There's a narrative called Two Detroits, which the mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan, hates to hear. But a lot of people believe it's true.
You go into the Midtown area, it's heavily white in a heavily black city.
It's not going to be one strategy that brings the economy of Detroit back. It's going to be a mix of strategies, and we're trying to pursue all of them.
I mean, you got to have the cooperation of everybody who lives and works in this area. You got to have investment from outsiders. It's a real balancing act. I mean, it's a real dance you got to do. If it was easy, they would have solved it already. I mean, it's so hard to figure out.
And it's heartbreaking now to drive down the streets that I grew up on. I tossed the football on. Communities where I went to school, to grade school. Tragedy in terms of vacant houses, people who were victims of the foreclosure crisis. It is not a comeback city until those communities experience a renaissance.